The millionaire's baby got sick, and all the nannies ran away. But this maid stayed. Past midnight, the ocean kept breathing in slow tides. But inside Ethan Caldwell's cliffside mansion, everything shattered under the raw cry of a child. Liam, 18 months old, flushed beet red, body trembling with fever, hiccuping between bouts of dry heaves. Ethan shot out of bed as if yanked by an invisible cord, bare feet flying down the dark hall, his heart pounding like a drumline in his skull. The nursery door swung open. Warm lamplight spilled over cloud-painted walls. On the floor, the sting of antiseptic tangled with the sour of curdled milk. Liam curled in his crib, panting fast, eyes wet and searching the air for rescue. Ethan lunged, scooping him up. The tiny body was scorching, a coal pressed to his chest. In the corner, a scene that made no sense. 5 women, the nannies he paid at the very top of the market, were shoving clothes into suitcases. Their words collided in a rush, like gears ripping themselves free from a machine about to seize. "Mr. Caldwell," said Victoria Allen, who always introduced herself as a pediatric specialist, breathless, peeling off a glove and tossing it into the bin. "I can't stay. This could be contagious. I have to protect my license." Clara Brooks zipped up her medical pouch, avoiding Ethan's eyes. This is beyond early childhood education. Liam needs medical intervention, not in-home care." Naomi Lee, usually soft-spoken like a therapist, now sounded hard as glass. "I work with special needs children, not pediatric emergencies. If anything happens, the liability..." Hannah Scott already had her coat on, those international certifications in her resume suddenly irrelevant in the face of a very human fear. "My professional insurance does not cover this scenario." Melissa Grant, the celebrity nanny the magazines raved about, dragged her suitcase across the wood with a cold clatter. "My reputation is everything. I can't risk it." "Wait!" Ethan clutched Liam tighter, feeling his son's furnace-hot breath on his neck. "I'll pay you double, triple, just stay tonight." Victoria shook her head, eyes dodging the child. "It isn't about money. It's my career. I'm sorry." Liam wailed, a high broken sound, and his tiny hand scrabbled at his father's collar. Ethan felt like a man with enough money to buy anything, except the one thing he needed, a heart that stayed. Zippers rasped, wheels grated on the floor. Doors closed with the finality of iron. 5 shadows skimmed down the long hall and vanished. The silence after was so heavy he could hear the wall clock. Ethan pressed his cheek to Liam's forehead. Fire. He thumbed his phone, voice rough with panic. "Dr. Hernandez, please! Liam's burning up, vomiting, breathing fast." "Yes, I'll wait." At the doorway, a small figure appeared, still holding a cleaning cloth. Grace Rivera, the 27-year-old housekeeper, stood there. Dark eyes lit with something steady he hadn't seen in anyone else tonight. "Mr. Caldwell," she murmured, as if afraid to disturb the fragile air. "If you'll allow me, I can help." Ethan turned, the vein at his temple fluttering. "You're not a nanny. This..." "I know." Grace nodded, her voice strangely calm. "But I raised my younger siblings. I've seen fevers like this. I can hold him, cool him, keep him sipping tiny amounts, until the doctor arrives." On the side table, expensive tools lay scattered. A digital thermometer, a sleek humidifier, gleaming bottles of sanitizer. But Ethan understood. None of them knew how to sing, to listen to a hiccup, to quiet fear with the warmth of an embrace. Liam groaned long and hiccuped again. Grace stepped in, offering a clean cloth. "May I have him for a moment, if you trust me?" Ethan's arms stalled mid-air, half instinct to protect, half exhaustion. He looked at her, hair tied back, a faded tee, hands with fine work calluses. No frame degrees, no glossy profiles, just eyes that didn't flinch from a child's cry. "I'll be right here," she said, reading his hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." A small flame flared in Ethan's chest, the flame of trust, thin and fierce. He shifted Liam into Grace's arms. The boy tensed, then melted against her shoulder, as if he'd found sand under his feet in the break of a wave. Grace set a warm palm at the nape of his neck and swayed, barely perceptible. "Shh, Liam," she whispered, a voice like a shaded path on a hot day. "I'm here." She scanned the room, quick but gentle. "I'll need a basin of warm water, some chamomile. Tea is fine if you have it, and soft towels. We'll warm the wrists and ankles. No sudden chills." Ethan nodded, grateful for the shape of a task. He ran for the things she'd asked for. When he returned, Grace had lowered the lights, drawn the blinds, ushered the room's breath into the rhythm of a heartbeat. She laid Liam side-lying across her shoulder, the other hand warming his wrist, as if afraid to break a soap bubble. Outside, an engine faded. The professionals were gone. Inside, a woman with no glossy title stood on the lip of a long night, holding a small life with her presence alone. His phone buzzed. "The doctor's 20 minutes out," Ethan said, standing sentry at her side. "Thank you," Grace answered. She began to sing, not a full lullaby, but little threads of sound, enough to stitch the space between the boys' breaths. Liam hiccuped, then settled half a notch. Ethan felt his shoulders drop, like a bamboo bridge easing under wind. He looked at Grace, wanting to say something truer than thanks, but what came was simple. "Thank you for staying." Grace smiled without looking up, eyes on the flushed skin easing under her palm. "Tonight, we just need to stay," she said. "Tomorrow can wait." And under a thin cocoon of golden light, a child's cry backed away from the edge, leaving the room with a different tempo, the tempo of a hope so small you could miss it, and yet bright enough to lead the way through the dark. The room glowed in the dim gold of a single lamp, its light trembling against the ceiling. The air was still enough to catch the faint ticking of the clock, the soft rattle of the sea breeze through the cracked window, the uneven breathing of a child fighting fever. Ethan sat in the chair opposite, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the woman holding his son. His chest was a chaos of fear, exhaustion, and a gratitude too raw to name. Grace sat at the edge of the bed, her arms gently cupping Liam's small body. The warm towel she used carried the faint scent of chamomile. She dabbed his wrists and ankles, then placed her hand on his chest, counting each delicate heartbeat. Every time Liam trembled, she rocked him, her voice nothing more than a soft breath against the darkness. "It's okay, little one. I'm here, just rest." It wasn't quite a lullaby, but something quieter, breath matching breath, heartbeat to heartbeat. Ethan raised his head, his fingers knotted tightly. He had seen hundreds of people in his life, partners, investors, friends, but never had he seen tenderness like this. Every motion of hers was deliberate, unhurried, calm. It wasn't training, it was instinct. She wasn't just tending to his son's body, she was touching his soul. At 2 a.m, the heat on Liam's skin began to ease. Grace pressed her hand to the boy's forehead and turned to Ethan. "His fever's coming down," she whispered. He moved closer, touching his son's brow. The fire was fading, replaced by a damp coolness. Something inside him unclenched. He nodded, his throat tight. "You're sure?" "Yes," she said softly. He'll be fine. Just keep him warm and steady." A while later, Liam's hiccups quieted, his eyelids fluttered, and his tiny fingers curled around Grace's. His breathing smoothed into a gentle rhythm. She smiled, weary but serene. Ethan stood watching, the panic draining from his face. The sight before him, this woman sitting in the half-light, rocking his child in her arms, filled him with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. His eyes burned, not with fear this time, but with something deeper. He was looking at what he'd thought was gone forever. A home. By 3, Dr. Hernandez arrived, an older man with silver hair and calm eyes. He examined the boy carefully, listening, measuring, nodding. "He's responding well," the doctor said. "A viral fever, not dangerous. Keep his fluids up. Whatever she's doing, let her keep doing it." He turned to Grace, impressed. "You've got good hands. I've met plenty of trained people, but few with instincts like yours." Grace blushed, lowering her eyes. "I just did what I used to do for my brothers and sisters." The doctor left. The room filled again with the warm scent of chamomile and silence that felt like a prayer. Ethan pulled a chair closer. Grace still held Liam, his head resting on her shoulder, breath calm, cheeks flushed with color. "You can rest," Ethan said quietly. "Let me take him." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "He just fell asleep. If I move, he'll wake." Something in her tone stopped him. He nodded and sat back down, unable to look away. Time slipped forward. Outside, the horizon lightened, thin streaks of pink over the sea. The air turned warmer. Grace's shoulders trembled with fatigue, yet she didn't let go. In that tender light, she didn't look like a housekeeper anymore. She looked like a mother guarding her child with everything she had. A beam of sunlight touched Liam's face. He stirred, sighed, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a faint smile. Ethan reached out and brushed the boy's forehead. Cool. The fever had broken. He exhaled slowly, the sound mingling with the whisper of dawn. Grace looked up and smiled at him. "He's okay now." Ethan met her eyes. The morning light painted her face in gold, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. She was beautiful, not in a way that called attention, but in the quiet, unassuming way of someone brave enough to care. He bent his head slightly, his voice low, trembling with sincerity. "You saved my son." Grace's smile deepened, soft as morning sunlight. "No, sir. He just needed someone to stay. I just couldn't walk away." Ethan said nothing more. He looked at the two of them, his sleeping child and the woman who refused to leave, and knew that this night had changed him forever. Morning sunlight spilled through the window, soft and golden, warming the face of the sleeping child in Grace's arms. The mansion, once cold and hollow, now seemed alive again. Quiet, safe, almost tender. Ethan stood by the door, watching. The memory of the night still lingered like an echo in his chest. She had been the only one who stayed. No money, no contract, just heart. When Grace gently laid Liam down, tucking the thin blanket around him, Ethan whispered, "You should rest. I'll watch him." She smiled faintly. "I'm used to staying up. I'll rest when he's really well." Her voice floated softly through the air, fragile yet steady, a note of peace in a house that had known only silence. But peace never lasts long. A few hours later, the heavy iron gate swung open. The sharp click of high heels echoed down the marble hallway. Ethan turned sharply, his expression darkening. 5 women swept in, dressed immaculately, faces polished, eyes gleaming with arrogance. Victoria led the way. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she said crisply. "We've returned to resume our duties. I assume you've realized that handling a sick child requires professionals." Grace froze when she heard the voices. She turned, startled, feeling suddenly small in her worn t-shirt and tired face. Under the bright light of day, she looked out of place. Modest, simple, real, amidst the sleek perfection of the 5 women who'd once ruled this house. Clara spoke next, her tone dripping with condescension. "The boy looks better now. That's good. But we'll take over from here. Letting an untrained housemaid handle a sick child? That's reckless." Grace lowered her head, hands clasped tightly. The weight of their eyes was sharp, like judgment pressed into her skin. Naomi crossed her arms. "Mr. Caldwell, if she causes any infection, you could face serious legal consequences. You understand that, don't you?" Ethan said nothing. His silence was heavier than anger. He looked at Grace, still standing there, humble and trembling, then back at the women whose polished confidence now rang hollow. Melissa, the self-proclaimed star nanny, tilted her chin. "You're lucky we came back, Mr. Caldwell. Otherwise, who knows what could have happened to your son? Surely you understand how irresponsible it is to let a cleaning lady take charge." Ethan drew a slow breath. The memory of last night flashed before his eyes. Grace's hands steady, her voice calm, the way his son had finally slept in her arms. He clenched his fists. "Do you know what happened last night?" he asked quietly. They exchanged confused glances. "When my son was burning with fever," Ethan continued, voice hardening. "When I called for help and only heard doors slamming shut behind me, the only person who stayed was her." He pointed toward Grace. "She saved my son while all of you, highly paid professionals, ran away." The air went still. Victoria frowned, forcing composure. "Mr. Caldwell, you're being emotional. We acted responsibly. That illness could have been contagious and—" "Enough," Ethan cut her off, his tone cold as steel. "I didn't hire you to run when things got hard. I hired you to care for my child, and the only one who did that was Grace." He turned to her, his voice softening. "You can stay. I need someone I can trust." Shock rippled through the group. Clara gasped. Melissa stepped forward, trying to steady her tone. "You can't just fire us because of one bad night. You'll regret this. We're the only certified caregivers in this city." Ethan gave a dry, bitter laugh. "A certificate means nothing if it comes without a heart." Victoria's jaw tightened, fury flickering behind her professional mask. "Fine. If that's your decision, we'll go. But don't think this is over. You've made a mistake, Mr. Caldwell. A costly one." Ethan met her gaze. "No, for the first time I haven't." They turned sharply, heels striking the marble like gunshots. Grace remained still, staring at the floor, barely breathing. When the front door slammed shut, silence returned, broken only by the soft sigh of a sleeping child. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Ethan said quietly. Grace shook her head. "It's all right, sir. People like me, we're used to not being believed." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Well," he said finally, "I believe you." She froze, eyes glimmering. Outside, sunlight bathed the room, framing them beside Liam's crib, 2 strangers bound by one sleepless night. And far down the sunlit drive, 5 women in designer heels walked away, faces stiff with rage. Victoria glanced back once, her lips curling. "If she thinks she can steal what's ours," she hissed, "she's in for a rude awakening." The others said nothing, but their eyes burned with the same fury, an ember that would soon ignite into a storm of vengeance. After that long night, even the light in the seaside mansion seemed different. Morning no longer felt cold, but warm, filled with the quiet pulse of life. Liam stopped crying through the night. His laughter returned, bright and pure. Each dawn, as the cries of seagulls echoed over the cliffs, the nursery filled with soft singing and the sound of a child's giggle. Ethan often lingered by the doorway, coffee in hand, just to listen. That sound, the laughter of his son, was something he hadn't heard since his wife's death. This morning, he watched as Liam clung to a chair, wobbling on his tiny feet, while Grace knelt beside him, waving a soft blue cloth toy. "Come on, Liam," she coaxed sweetly. "One more step. That's it. Good boy." Liam toppled, then burst into laughter. Grace laughed too, cheeks flushed pink with joy. The two of them shared a rhythm of understanding beyond words. Just smiles, glances, trust. Ethan stood motionless, afraid that even a breath might break the moment. In the following days, Grace began to change the nursery. She removed the cold, sterile decorations left by the former nannies, the framed charts, the automated toys, and replaced them with simple, handmade touches: soft fabric pillows, pastel walls, a tiny plant on the windowsill. The room came alive, glowing with warmth. Passing by, Ethan paused. "The room looks different," he said. Grace, arranging folded blankets, answered softly, "I just wanted him to feel this is his home, not a hospital." The words pierced something deep inside him. Yes, he had turned this house into a fortress, safe but lifeless. And now this woman, with nothing but gentleness and care, was restoring what he had thought gone forever. That afternoon, while Ethan worked downstairs, a burst of laughter drifted from the living room. It was bright, unrestrained, his son's laughter. He followed the sound. There in the sunlight, Grace spun Liam gently in her arms, both laughing until they could hardly breathe. Her hair had come loose, glowing in the light like strands of gold. The sight rooted him to the floor. He hadn't realized how empty his life had been until that moment. Later, Grace took Liam outside. The boy toddled barefoot across the lawn, tripping often but never crying. Each time he fell, Grace was there, close enough to catch him, but always letting him try. When he finally reached a flower and touched its petals, he laughed so loud that even the wind seemed to laugh with him. Watching from the terrace, Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't him teaching the child how to live, it was his son and this woman teaching him how to feel alive again. That night, when the house grew still, Ethan brought a cup of tea upstairs. Grace was tidying the room, folding blankets. He hesitated in the doorway before speaking. "Grace, I wanted to thank you." She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For bringing laughter back into this house," he said quietly. "Not just for my son, for me." Her eyes widened, then she smiled shyly. "I just did what's right, sir. The boy needs love. I only tried to make him feel it." Ethan shook his head. "No, you gave him something more than love. You gave him peace." Grace's cheeks turned pink. "I'm just a housekeeper, Mr. Caldwell. Please don't overpraise me." He met her gaze, voice low and rough. "You're not just that." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Liam stirred in his sleep, his lips curling into a faint smile. Ethan looked at his son, then at Grace, and something invisible connected them. A thread of gratitude, trust, and a tender feeling neither dared to name. That night, in her small room downstairs, Grace lay awake, her heart still racing. His words echoed in her mind. You're not just that. She told herself it was only gratitude, that the distance between their worlds was too vast. Yet when her fingers brushed the old bracelet on her wrist, her mother's only keepsake, she smiled faintly. Even if she couldn't dream, she finally felt she belonged somewhere. Upstairs, Ethan stood beside his son's crib. He stroked the boy's hair, whispering softly, "You're lucky to have her." His words melted into the soft hum of the sea breeze. He didn't know it yet, but from that moment on, an invisible thread had been woven between the three of them, fragile, warm, and stronger than anything he had ever known. In the days that followed, while the Caldwell mansion was finally filled with rare peace somewhere else in the city, 5 women sat around a glass table in an upscale cafe. Noon sunlight glinted off their espresso cups, but in their eyes, there was another kind of light, cold, sharp, and full of vengeance. Victoria Allen crossed her legs and spoke in a calm but venomous tone. "Mr. Caldwell chose a maid over us. Does he really think he can humiliate our reputation and just move on?" Clara Brooks scoffed, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "He's delusional. And that woman, Grace, she really thinks a few sleepless nights with the child make her special. Typical of someone who doesn't know her place." Naomi Lee sipped her coffee and smiled faintly. "I have contacts in the media. If we plant the right rumors, the press will do the rest. Just a hint of scandal, and public opinion will tear her apart." Hannah Scott, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice low but edged. "We have to be careful. We can't make it look like jealousy. People must believe we're acting to protect the child." Melissa Grant leaned back in her chair, her smile razor-sharp. "We don't even need to make things up. We just exaggerate what's true. Everyone knows Ethan Caldwell hasn't been stable since his wife's death. If we say he's emotionally unstable, seeking comfort from his maid, the media will devour it." Victoria nodded slowly, her tone turning icy. "Then let's show the world. He's no perfect father, and she's no angel. She's a thief who stole affection to steal a position." And so, under the bright midday sun, a plan was born, one that dripped with darkness. 3 days later, the rumors began to spread. At first, just a few scattered comments. "Billionaire Ethan Caldwell suffers emotional breakdown after wife's death." Then, headlines grew bolder. "The maid who became a mother. Is the Caldwell child really safe?" Insider reports. Ethan Caldwell being manipulated by employee for financial gain. Within 48 hours, the news swept across every social platform. Photos of Ethan holding Liam in the garden, with Grace beside him, were edited and captioned, "Closer than they should be." Underneath, thousands of cruel comments bloomed. "She knows how to take advantage of a grieving man. She's obviously after his money. Poor child, loses his mother only to be raised by the maid." Ethan stared at the screen, throat dry. He knew exactly where it came from. He knew who had the resources to orchestrate something this precise. But what hurt most wasn't the lies about him. It was knowing Grace would eventually see them. When he entered the nursery, Grace was sitting beside Liam, feeding him gently. Her face looked calm, but her eyes betrayed quiet sorrow. She smiled when she saw him, trying to seem normal. "Have you had breakfast, sir?" "I have," he replied hoarsely. "Have you seen what's online?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I have, but it's all right. I'm used to unkind words." "No, Grace." Ethan's voice softened as he reached for her hand. "They're trying to hurt you, and they've gone too far." She shook her head. "I don't matter, sir, as long as Liam isn't affected. I can handle it. But Grace didn't know. The storm had only begun. That afternoon, Victoria sent an anonymous email to a major newspaper. I used to work for the Caldwell family. The current maid was fired from 2 previous homes for theft. She's manipulating Mr. Caldwell for personal gain. You should investigate. Within 24 hours, the headline appeared on the front page. Secrets behind the Caldwell estate. Does the maid have a criminal past? A photo of Grace holding Liam filled the article. Her gentle smile twisted into something cunning by cruel captions accusing her of deceit. Hundreds of toxic comments followed. The next morning, Ethan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Business partners called, investors sent messages, and several withdrew from pending deals. Reporters camped outside the mansion, cameras flashing through the gates. He had to hire extra security just to keep them from disturbing Liam's sleep. It felt like reliving his worst nightmare, the chaos that followed his wife's death. Only this time, sharper, crueler, and directed at the woman he wanted to protect. That night, Grace sat in her small room, gripping her phone. She scrolled through hundreds of comments, her heart pounding painfully. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was terrified for the child. She knew that people like Ethan couldn't afford scandal for long. One day, to protect his son, he might have no choice but to let her go. The door opened. Ethan stood there, exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "Grace, we need to talk." She stood quickly. "If this is about what's happening online, I understand. I can leave. I don't want to cause more trouble." Ethan took a step closer and shook his head. "No, Grace, you're not going anywhere. But, no buts. I know who's behind this, and I won't let them destroy our lives." The way he said our lives made her heart stutter. She met his eyes, tired, but burning with conviction. "They're coming tomorrow," Ethan said, voice low. "Who's coming?" "Child Protective Services. They said they'll conduct an emergency inspection. Someone filed a report claiming you're a danger to Liam." Grace froze. The words hit her like a slap. "But I've never done anything wrong." "I know," Ethan said firmly, "and I'll prove it." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They can say whatever they want, Grace, but they don't know who you are. I do." Outside, the sea wind whispered against the glass, calm and steady. But inside their hearts, a storm had begun to rise. A storm of lies, jealousy, and wounded pride, threatening to sweep away every fragile piece of peace they had just begun to build. The next morning, the real storm arrived. What Ethan had feared the night before became reality. The doorbell rang through the calm seaside mansion, echoing off marble walls. A black government vehicle stopped at the gate, and 2 officials stepped out. Inspector James Porter, tall and thin, and Inspector Maria Lopez, a sharp-eyed woman from Child Protective Services. Ethan met them at the grand foyer, keeping his voice steady. "Good morning. I'm Ethan Caldwell. I was informed about the inspection, but I didn't expect it to be this soon." Maria opened her folder, her tone clipped. "We received a report claiming that a toddler under 2 years old is being cared for by an unlicensed individual. By regulation, we are required to inspect immediately." Ethan nodded, drawing a deep breath. "Of course, please come in." Grace heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Her heart pounded. She had just finished feeding Liam, who was happily stacking wooden blocks on the floor. When Ethan entered with the inspectors, she rose quickly, bowing her head slightly to greet them, trying to hide her trembling hands. Maria's gaze swept the room. The soft pastel walls, neatly arranged toys, the sunlight filling every corner, the faint scent of cleanliness and calm. She made a few notes. "The room is well kept," she said evenly. "I'd like to see the child's daily care routine." Grace nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Every morning, I give him cereal or milk depending on the temperature and how he feels. I record everything here: feeding times, naps, room temperature, play behavior. This is my logbook." She handed over the notebook, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting. Morning, cheerful mood, played with blocks for 20 minutes. Lunch, ate half a bowl of chicken porridge, slept for 2 hours. Inspector Porter flipped through the pages, his expression softening. "Very thorough. I rarely see this level of detail from hired caregivers." Grace lowered her gaze. "I don't have a license, sir, so I try to make up for it with care and observation." Ethan's chest tightened. He wished they could see what he saw, that her work wasn't duty, but devotion. Maria approached the crib where Liam sat. She crouched slightly. "Hello there." The boy looked up, bright blue eyes shining, and to everyone's surprise offered her a wooden block. Maria blinked, then smiled faintly. "He's very healthy. No signs of neglect." Ethan exhaled in relief, but before he could speak, Maria closed her notebook and said coldly, "However, allowing an unlicensed person to be the primary caregiver of a child, this young is a regulatory violation. Regardless of her performance, the law requires professional certification." The room fell silent. Grace clasped her hands tightly. Ethan protested, "But the licensed nannies left when my son was sick. She stayed. She saved his life." Maria remained professional. "I understand, Mr. Caldwell, and I don't doubt her intentions. But our duty is to enforce standards, not emotions. I will have to note that the caregiver lacks professional credentials." It was as if a sentence had been pronounced. By that afternoon, every major news outlet had the story. Child Services conducts emergency inspection at Caldwell Mansion. Billionaire Ethan Caldwell violates child welfare regulations. Within hours, Caldwell Industries stock dropped 10%. Ethan's phone rang nonstop, advisors, board members, investors, all asking the same question. "What have you done, Ethan?" He stood in his office, staring at the ocean, fists clenched until his knuckles went white. Everything he'd tried to protect, his company, his reputation, the fragile peace he'd just begun to rebuild, was falling apart. But what hurt most was knowing Grace would blame herself, and she did. That night, Grace came to his study. She stood in the doorway, her face pale under the warm light. "Mr. Caldwell?" Her voice trembled. He looked up and, seeing her eyes, already knew what she was about to say. "Grace, don't—" "I'm sorry," she interrupted softly. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been here, they wouldn't have targeted you. Your company wouldn't be suffering. Your name wouldn't be dragged through the mud." Ethan stood, stepping toward her, but she took a step back. "I've been thinking," she continued, her voice breaking. "I should leave. Once they don't see me anymore, maybe they'll stop." "No." Ethan's voice rose sharply. "If you leave, it's like admitting their lies are true. You did nothing wrong." Grace's eyes glistened, but her tone was firm. "Maybe not, but staying here is hurting you. I can't let that happen." Her words cracked, fragile but resolute. "I know my place, Mr. Caldwell. I'm just a maid. I have no right to make anyone lose their honor because of me. Please, let me go." Ethan's fists trembled at his sides in that moment. He wanted to stop her, to tell her she mattered more than anything. But reason, duty, and the crushing weight of reputation held him still. Grace turned, her shoulders shaking. Before she reached the door, she whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, and for letting me feel like I mattered." The door closed softly behind her. The sea wind slipped through the cracks, cold and merciless. Ethan sank into his chair, hands trembling. The mansion, once alive with laughter, now felt hollow again. And far away, the women who had started it all were smiling, their first victory in a long, cruel game. But they didn't know that even as Grace walked away, the quiet fire she'd left in Ethan's and Liam's hearts still burned. And that flame would be the one to turn the tide against them. After Grace left, the seaside mansion sank into an unfamiliar silence. No more baby laughter echoed down the halls. No more soft humming in the mornings. No trace of chamomile lingering in the nursery. Only the sound of waves and Ethan's heavy footsteps pacing through empty rooms. For the first 3 days, Liam didn't understand what had changed. Each morning, when another caretaker brought him food, he looked around, confused. He stretched out his little arms and murmured one word in his baby voice. "Gray, Gray." The sound sliced through Ethan like a blade. Every time his son said her name, a sharp ache bloomed in his chest, and the quiet of the house grew heavier. He tried to restore order, to make life function again. New nannies followed schedules perfectly, meals on time, naps precise to the minute, the room temperature calibrated, everything by the book. But no matter how flawlessly they performed, the nursery remained empty. No one sang when the boy cried. No one met his gaze with real affection. That night, Ethan sat in his study, the glow of his computer lighting his weary face. A new interview filled the screen, a glossy magazine featuring one of the former nannies. Victoria sat before the camera, her expression falsely solemn. "I only care about the child," she said. "That woman had no credentials, and Mr. Caldwell has been unstable since his wife's passing. I fear the child may be at risk." Below, the comments poured in. Men always lose their minds over manipulative women. Of course, the maid's after his money. Ethan shut the screen, his hands trembling slightly. Anger flared in him, but exhaustion smothered it before it could burn. He knew that reacting now would only feed the fire. From the nursery came the sound of crying. Ethan rushed in. Liam sat in his crib, tears streaming down his cheeks, still calling softly, "Gray, Gray." Ethan lifted him, holding him tight. "Shh, Daddy's here, Liam." But the child's small hands clutched at his collar, his eyes silently asking, "Where is she?" Ethan's heart ached as he whispered, "She'll come back, son. I promise." Yet deep down, he wasn't sure he believed himself. The next day, a crisis meeting convened at Caldwell Industries. The boardroom was silent except for rustling papers and weary sighs. Chairman Sullivan adjusted his glasses, voice hard as steel. "Ethan, we're losing millions every day. The company's reputation is collapsing because of your personal scandal. You need to make a statement." Ethan leaned back, voice rough. "What do you want me to say? That she's no longer part of your life. That it was all rumors. Cut it clean." A long silence followed, all eyes fixed on him. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, I'll do it." That afternoon, he faced the press. Before a wall of cameras, he stood straight, eyes tired but steady. "I want to clarify," he began slowly, "that Ms. Grace Rivera, who once worked in my household, is no longer employed here. She is a good, dedicated woman, but we have no further connection. Any rumors beyond that are false." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Caldwell, can you confirm she wasn't a danger to your son?" Ethan looked straight into the lens, his voice calm but unyielding. "My son is alive and well because of her. No one has the right to insult the person who saved him." Then he turned and walked off stage, leaving a room full of flashing cameras behind. That night, back at the mansion, the emptiness returned. He had done what was necessary for the company, but everything felt wrong inside. Liam was asleep, his little face peaceful on the pillow. Ethan stood over him, brushing his hair gently. "She misses you, Liam," he whispered. His gaze fell on a small bracelet lying by the crib, the one Grace had forgotten when she left. He picked it up, curling it in his palm as if holding a piece of her. Outside, the rain began. Waves pounded against the cliffs, the sound echoing through the hollow house. Ethan sat by the window, watching the storm lash the glass. In his mind, her voice still lingered. "I just did what's right." He imagined her somewhere in the city, alone, enduring the storm of lies he couldn't shield her from. The thought made his chest tighten with helpless anger. The next morning, he called his assistant. "Find her," he said firmly. "Grace Rivera. Wherever she is, I need to see her." The assistant hesitated only a second. "Yes, sir." When the call ended, Ethan turned toward the sea. The wind tore through the curtains, gray clouds gathering over the horizon. He knew another battle was coming, not for reputation this time, but for the truth. Somewhere across the city, in a small rented room, Grace sat by the window, watching the same rain blur the glass. Her hands rested on her lap, still remembering the warmth of the child she had once held. No matter how hard she tried to forget, Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. "You're not going anywhere." But she had gone, and now their worlds felt farther apart than ever. The storm outside raged on, but in both their hearts, a single flame still burned, quiet, defiant, and waiting for the moment it would rise again. 4 days after Grace left, rain hammered the coast from morning until dusk. Wind howled through the pines outside the mansion, carrying the mournful cry of the sea. Ethan was in his study when frantic footsteps echoed down the hall. A sharp knock followed. "Sir, it's Liam!" The housekeeper gasped, her voice trembling. Ethan froze. He barely caught the words, "fever again," before panic took hold. He sprinted upstairs, his heart pounding. In the nursery, Liam lay curled on the bed, face flushed red, breathing shallow, eyes half open. The private doctor bent over the child, then looked up gravely. "He needs to be hospitalized immediately. I suspect meningitis." The words struck like thunder. Ethan's knees nearly gave out. He scooped Liam into his arms, wrapping him in a blanket, his voice cracking. "Get the car, now!" News of Liam's hospitalization spread faster than the storm itself. Social media exploded with headlines. Billionaire Ethan Caldwell's son in critical condition. The price of letting an unqualified maid care for a child? Across the city, in a small apartment, Grace sat by the window, her tea untouched and cold. Each headline made her chest tighten. When she saw the photo of the ambulance parked in front of the mansion, her breath hitched. "Liam?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Without another thought, she grabbed her coat and rushed into the storm. Rain slapped her face, but she didn't stop. Her heart beat to a single rhythm. She had to be there. Even if Ethan hated her, even if the world scorned her, she couldn't stay away while the child's life hung in the balance. At St. George Hospital, chaos reigned. Reporters filled the corridors, camera flashes lighting up the sterile white walls. Ethan sat outside the emergency ward, pale and silent. A doctor emerged, voice urgent. "We're stabilizing his temperature and breathing. The symptoms point strongly to meningitis. He's being moved to the ICU." Ethan nodded, speechless. Through the glass of the isolation room, he could see his son, small, fragile, surrounded by tubes and machines blinking ominously. "My boy," he whispered, voice breaking. Then, a familiar voice came from behind him. "Mr. Caldwell." He turned. Grace stood in the hallway, soaked to the skin, hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes wide with fear. I had to come," she said, trembling. "I'm sorry. I couldn't stay away." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. All anger, pride, and distance dissolved. He nodded. "Thank you for coming." Grace stepped closer to the glass, her palm pressing against it. Seeing Liam lying motionless inside, tears spilled down her face. "Oh God, I promised I'd never let him get sick again. It's my fault. I left him." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, Grace. It's not your fault. This illness can relapse no matter what we do." She shook her head. "If I'd been here, I would have noticed the signs sooner. I know his breathing, his sounds. I would have known." "Grace," Ethan interrupted gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." She looked at him, gratitude and grief colliding in her eyes. Under the harsh hospital lights, the two stood quietly, united by fear and love. Moments later, the entrance doors opened again. The sound of heels on tile echoed sharply. Victoria and the other 4 nannies appeared, perfectly dressed, faces arranged in practiced sympathy. "We came as soon as we heard," Victoria cooed. "How terrible, poor little boy." Clara sighed dramatically. "We warned you, Mr. Caldwell. Childcare requires professionals. This is exactly what happens when people ignore expertise." Naomi dabbed fake tears from her eyes, a spark of triumph glinting behind them. "We don't want to point fingers, but clearly, this proves everything we said." Grace's stomach twisted with every word, her hands balled into fists. Ethan spun toward them, his voice cold as ice. "Why are you here? To gloat?" Melissa feigned offense. "Of course not. We care about the child. We used to care for him, remember?" "Care?" Ethan snapped. "You abandoned him when he was sick. You left him to die, and now you dare talk about care?" Victoria's smile didn't falter. "We simply told the truth, Mr. Caldwell. And it seems the truth is showing itself, doesn't it?" Ethan's fists clenched, but Grace touched his arm, shaking her head. "Don't," she whispered, voice trembling but resolute. "They're not worth it." He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly unclenched his hand. Together they turned back to the glass where Liam lay motionless, his small chest rising and falling faintly beneath the tubes. Grace pressed her hand to the glass again. "He'll make it," she murmured. "He's stronger than we think." Ethan's gaze lingered on his son, then drifted to Grace. In that fragile instant, he knew he would do whatever it took, not only to save his child, but to protect the woman who had never stopped caring. Outside, the 5 women walked away from the hospital. Victoria's voice low and cold. "Let them enjoy their hope. It won't last." Rain kept falling, streaking down the windows of the ICU. Inside, Ethan and Grace stood side by side, watching over the small life that had bound them together. Between the scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beep of machines, something unspoken pulsed in the air. Fear, love, and the first spark of defiance against the darkness closing in. Rain still pounded the hospital windows, each drop tapping like a fragile heartbeat. Inside the ICU, cold white light fell across Liam's tiny body. The monitors beeped slowly, irregularly, each sound a reminder of how close life and death could sit side by side. Grace and Ethan stood outside the glass, their faces pale, their breath synchronized with the machine's uncertain rhythm. A nurse stepped out, voice low and worried. "He's weakening. If his oxygen levels don't improve by morning, we may have to escalate treatment." Ethan nodded stiffly, his throat tight. Grace pressed a trembling hand against her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Then, inside the room, Liam stirred. His lips parted slightly. Ethan leaned forward. "What is it, son?" The doctor bent closer. From the boy's cracked lips came a faint whisper, barely audible but painfully clear. Marie." Grace froze. "Marie," the nickname Liam used to call her when his words were still forming. A sound so small, yet it shattered every wall between them. Ethan turned to her, eyes wide, then faced the doctor. "Let her in. Now." The doctor hesitated. "It's against protocol?" "She's not an outsider," Ethan interrupted, voice firm. "She's who he's calling for." After a brief silence, the doctor nodded, signaling the nurse to open the door. Grace stepped inside. The air was cold and sterile, humming with machines. Each step she took felt like wading through water. Liam lay there, so still, so small, his eyelashes damp against his cheeks. "Liam," she whispered, voice trembling. "Marie's here. Can you hear me?" His tiny fingers twitched, reaching into the air. Grace rushed forward and clasped his hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not leaving again." The moment their hands touched, the monitors shifted. The erratic line steadied, the rhythm evened out, heart rate rising from 60 to 70 to 80. The doctors froze. "My God," one murmured. "Vitals stabilizing, cortisol dropping, blood pressure normalizing. This is incredible." A nurse gasped softly. "It's her. Her presence is reducing his biological stress." Ethan stood just beyond the glass, tears welling in his eyes. The woman everyone had condemned was now the reason his son was fighting to live. Grace kept holding Liam's hand, her forehead pressed to his. "I'm so sorry, Liam. I shouldn't have left. I promise I'll stay with you now. Always." A tear fell from her face onto his cheek. Liam's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in days he smiled weakly. "Marie," he whispered. Grace broke into tears, her voice shaking. "Yes, Marie's here, my love. I'm here." The doctor looked at his watch, then turned to Ethan, astonished. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's what we call an emotional bond response, a biological stabilization triggered by deep emotional connection." Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. He walked into the room, his steps slow and reverent. Grace looked up at him, guilt flooding her face. "I caused all this. You and your son." Ethan knelt beside her, shaking his head. "No, Grace. You didn't cause it. If anyone's at fault, it's me for letting the world hurt you." His voice cracked, raw and honest. "The love you have for my son is real, and that's something no degree, no training can ever teach." Grace covered her face, sobbing quietly. Ethan gently pulled her close, letting her lean against him. In that cold, sterile room, two broken souls found warmth in each other again, bound by a child's fragile heartbeat and a love that refused to fade. Behind them, the doctor smiled softly, gesturing for the lights to dim. "Let them be," he whispered to the nurses. "Sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine, but from the heart." Outside, the rain began to ease. Pale morning light crept through the blinds, spilling across Liam's peaceful face. His heartbeat was steady now, his breathing calm. Ethan bent down and kissed his son's forehead. "You'll be okay, Liam. You have Mari, and you have me." Grace stood beside him, her eyes still wet but glowing with hope. She looked at Liam, then at the softening sky beyond the window. Warmth filled her chest, fragile but real. Ethan turned to her, voice low and trembling with emotion. "Grace," he said, "if miracles exist, one just happened in front of me." She smiled faintly through her tears, a quiet, radiant smile that outshone even the first light of dawn. The miracle wasn't divine. It was human. It was love. Pure, selfless, and powerful enough to bring life back from the edge. The next morning, pale sunlight streamed into the hospital room. Liam slept peacefully in Grace's arms, his color restored, his breathing steady. Ethan sat beside them, eyes shadowed with fatigue but burning with resolve. He brushed his son's hair gently, then turned to Grace. "He's safe now," he said quietly. "It's time we finish this." Grace looked up, startled. "Finish? What do you mean?" Ethan took her hand, his voice steady. "The truth's been twisted long enough. They destroyed your name, nearly destroyed my son. It's time they face the consequences." That afternoon, several official vehicles from Child Protective Services arrived at the Caldwell estate. At the front stood Inspector Maria Lopez, accompanied by the 5 women, Victoria, Clara, Melissa, Naomi, and Hannah, dressed impeccably, smiles smug and satisfied, as if ready to witness Ethan's downfall. Victoria stepped forward, her tone sugary and false. "We're here for the reinvestigation, Mr. Caldwell. I'm sure the truth will come out soon enough." Ethan smiled faintly, calm and unreadable. "Indeed it will. Please come in." Grace waited nervously in the background, her hands clasped tight. She didn't know what Ethan was planning, only that he looked far too calm for a man surrounded by enemies. The grand living room gleamed under the chandelier. Maria opened her files, her voice official and cold. "We've received new evidence suggesting Ms. Grace Rivera may have engaged in misconduct and misrepresentation. We're here to review the claims." Victoria laid a folder on the table. "Here are documents proving she was fired twice for theft, and an audio recording between her and Mr. Caldwell suggesting an inappropriate relationship." Grace paled, her breath catching. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his eyes glinting with something fierce. "Thank you for bringing your evidence," he said evenly. "Because I have something to show you. Real evidence." He gestured to a technician. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, showing footage from a cafe's security camera, the very meeting where the 5 nannies plotted weeks ago. The sound was crisp and undeniable. Victoria's voice played first. "We'll ruin her. Spread the story that Ethan's unstable and that Maid stole from him. Once we get the media involved, they're finished." Clara laughed. "Just a few fake papers and a few calls to the press, that'll do it." Naomi added, "And if we're lucky, child services will step in. Then they're done for good." The recording filled the room, each word cut like a knife. Faces went pale. Victoria's fake composure cracked. Maria shot to her feet, voice sharp. "This is evidence of conspiracy, slander, and manipulation of public institutions. Do any of you have something to say?" Victoria stammered, forcing a smile. This must be edited. Mr. Caldwell has money. He could fake anything. Ethan's smile turned cold. You seem to forget that Cafe's entire surveillance system is owned by Caldwell Group. The footage and timestamps have already been verified by forensic analysts and handed to the authorities. He turned to Maria. You can confirm that. Maria nodded, signaling to the law enforcement officers accompanying the team. One stepped forward and snapped handcuffs onto Victoria's wrists. Victoria Allen and Associates, you are under arrest for defamation, falsification of evidence, and obstruction of justice. No, you can't do this, Clara screamed. Melissa burst into tears. Naomi covered her face. Hannah stood frozen, trembling. The once proud women were now reduced to chaos and fear, their empire of lies collapsing around them. Grace stood motionless, tears streaming silently. After months of humiliation and pain, justice had arrived, swift, clear, and undeniable. Ethan turned toward her, stepping closer. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his voice warm and sure. You protected my son, Grace. Now it's my turn to protect you. Grace broke down, sobbing. I never needed you to fix anything for me. But thank you for believing in me when no one else would. Ethan drew her into his arms. It's not about belief, he whispered. It's about knowing what's real, what the heart sees even when the world is blind. Maria approached them, her tone softer now. Ms. Rivera, she said, on behalf of the agency, I owe you an apology. You're not just innocent. You saved that child's life. Today, we all learned something. That real love heals more than any policy ever could. Grace nodded through her tears, overwhelmed by relief. Ethan's hand never left hers, grounding her in the moment as the officers led the 5 women away. When the doors closed, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing the room in gold. Ethan turned to her, voice gentle. It's over, Grace. You don't have to hide anymore. She looked up, smiling through the tears. No, we won't hide anymore. We'll live, because of Liam. Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. He knew, no matter what storms came next, they would stand together, from now on the side of truth, of love, and of the light that always returns after the rain. 2 weeks after the arrest of the 5 nannies, the atmosphere around the Caldwell estate had completely changed. The sky was clear again. The ocean breeze carried the soft breath of summer, and Liam's laughter filled the house. He had recovered completely. Running around the living room, giggling as Grace chased after him, while Ethan watched them both with quiet warmth in his eyes. But an even greater change was happening outside their home. Within days, the media, once their greatest nightmare, had become the wind spreading truth everywhere. The New York Herald ran a front-page headline that read, "A heart that saved a billionaire's son, the true story of Grace Rivera." The article detailed the hospital incident, quoting doctors who confirmed, "The presence of Grace Rivera helped stabilize the child through natural biological response, a phenomenon rarely seen in medicine." One paragraph moved the entire nation. It wasn't wealth or education that saved a life, but compassion. Grace Rivera isn't just a maid. She's living proof that pure love can work miracles. From that day, public opinion shifted entirely. Every defamatory article was taken down. Television networks, magazines, and even universities began reaching out to interview the woman who made America rethink the meaning of compassion. That morning, Grace stood on stage at Columbia University before a packed auditorium of students. The soft gold light from the stage bathed her calm, humble face. As she walked to the podium, silence fell across the hall. Hundreds of eyes followed the woman who had changed how the nation viewed dignity and care. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began softly, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm not a doctor or an expert. I'm just someone who loves her work and the child she cared for. Maybe that's the only reason I'm standing here today. I never believed love alone could save a life, until I saw Liam open his eyes again between the beeping of hospital machines." The room fell silent, then erupted into thunderous applause. One student stood, eyes glistening. "You've made me believe that kindness still exists in this world," she said. When the session ended, people rushed forward to shake Grace's hand, to take pictures, to thank her. But Grace only smiled gently and said, "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what was right." News of the event spread rapidly. On national television, an exclusive interview with Grace aired during prime time. The host asked, "After everything you've been through, what would you like to say to those who once looked down on your work?" Grace paused, then answered, her tone calm yet deeply moving. "No job is small when it's done with heart. We don't need a degree to love, and we don't need fame to be respected." The next day, millions shared that line online. Social organizations began calling for official recognition of childcare workers and their real skills. Grace's story was no longer just news. It had become a movement. A month later, the government officially launched the Grace Rivera program, the nation's first initiative to train and certify childcare providers based on skill, ethics, and compassion, regardless of education or background. At the inauguration ceremony, the Secretary of Labor declared, "Grace Rivera reminded us that dignity doesn't come from diplomas, but from the human heart." This program bears her name as a tribute to her kindness and unconditional devotion. When invited to speak, Grace smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I never imagined my name would stand for something so big," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "But if it helps people like me be treated with respect, then every pain I've endured was worth it." Ethan sat in the front row, pride shining in his eyes. Beside him, little Liam waved and giggled loudly. The boy shouted, his voice echoing through the hall, "Mama Marie!" The crowd burst into laughter, and Grace blushed, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. From that day forward, the name Grace Rivera was no longer tied to tragedy, but to inspiration, a symbol of compassion, of strength born from humility, and of the dignity of honest labor. Across city streets, posters appeared bearing the quote, "Love is the highest skill. Grace Rivera." That simple sentence became the motto taught in childcare training programs throughout the nation. And one quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace sat on the porch by the sea. Liam rested his head in her lap, Ethan beside her, their laughter mingling with the whisper of the waves. The ocean was calm, the breeze gentle, and peace filled their hearts like a long-awaited reward after the storm. Honor had been redeemed, but more importantly, truth had prevailed, and it had done so through love, through compassion, and through the unbreakable light of faith in humanity. That afternoon, as the sun sank low over the beach in front of the Caldwell estate, the sky glowed a soft shade of amber. The breeze brushed gently through the trees, and the sound of waves breaking against the shore echoed like the heartbeat of a house that had weathered so many storms. Grace sat on a wooden chair on the porch, Liam resting his head on her lap, smiling faintly in his sleep. She stroked the boy's soft hair, her eyes filled with peace. Ethan stepped outside, standing silently for a long while, watching the scene before him. That woman, The one who had once been nothing more than a temporary housekeeper on a job form, had now become the center of everything he cherished. He couldn't even remember what life had been like before she arrived. All he knew was that every empty space, every wound left by his late wife, had been gently healed by her kindness and quiet strength. He walked closer, his voice deep and warm. "Grace." She turned, a soft smile curving her lips. "Mr. Caldwell, is something wrong?" He sat down beside her. The reflection of the sunset danced in his eyes, turning them into small oceans. "Could you stop calling me Mr. Caldwell?" Grace chuckled softly, looking away. "It's a hard habit to break, sir. After all, I'm still just—" He interrupted her, his voice calm but resolute. "You're not just anything, Grace. There's no more employer and employee. We're a family." She froze, her heartbeat quickening. The breeze carried the scent of the sea, and his breath was close enough that she could feel it against her skin. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "We come from two different worlds, sir. I have nothing. My name has only just been cleared. I don't want the world to look at you with doubt again." Ethan smiled gently, his eyes unwavering. "You still don't understand, do you, Grace? You didn't just save my son. You saved me." She looked up at him, caught by the depth in his eyes, sincere, steady, and filled with something she had never dared to imagine. "Ethan," she whispered, calling his name for the first time without formality. "What are you saying?" He took her hand in his voice low but sure, every word landing softly on her heart. "Before you came, this house was just an empty shell. I was alive, but I wasn't living. You brought breath, laughter, light back into this place. You made me believe that love can still exist after loss. I tried to deny it, but I can't anymore. I love you, Grace." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't have to say that. Maybe you're just grateful." Ethan shook his head. "No. I know the difference between gratitude and love. Gratitude is for someone who helps you. Love is for someone who makes you want to live differently." In that instant, every wall between them fell away. The sea breeze brushed against them, lifting strands of her hair, which brushed softly against his cheek. Ethan reached out, tucking a lock behind her ear, so gently that Grace trembled. They looked at each other, long and silently, as if nothing else in the world existed but their shared heartbeat. Then, in the golden glow of sunset, Ethan leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't hurried nor fiery, just tender, quiet, and filled with everything unspoken between two souls that had been broken and were finally whole again. Grace closed her eyes, letting every fear melt away, her heart beating in rhythm with his. When they finally pulled apart, Liam had woken up. His bright eyes looked up at them, and a cheerful giggle escaped his lips. He stretched his tiny hands toward them. "Mama Mari," he called, his voice pure and warm, making both of them laugh through their tears. Ethan lifted his son into his arms and wrapped an arm around Grace. "That's right, son. Mama Mari." A few months later, on a crisp autumn morning, the sound of waves once again filled the air, this time as music for their wedding day. The ceremony took place in the small garden behind the mansion, where Grace had once planted her first white chrysanthemums. There were no lavish decorations, no grand guests, just close friends, a few loved ones, and the ocean breeze carrying the sweetness of joy. Grace wore a simple white dress, her hair tied loosely, her smile brighter than the morning sun. Ethan, in a gray suit, couldn't take his eyes off her for even a moment. When the minister began the vows, little Liam, dressed in a tiny matching suit, walked down the aisle, holding the wedding rings in both hands. His steps were small but proud, and when he reached them, he lifted his face and shouted, "Mama!" The guests burst into laughter, their joy blending with the waves and wind and the sound of two hearts beating as one. Ethan bent down, kissed Grace's forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for coming into my life, Grace. You're the most beautiful thing destiny ever gave me." Grace looked up, her eyes glimmering with tears and happiness. "Thank you for seeing me, not through the eyes of the world, but through your heart." They shared a kiss beneath the open sky, where the past was washed away, and love, born from kindness and courage, blossomed like sunlight after a long storm. From afar, the waves kept rising and falling against the shore, as if blessing their beginning. A beginning of love, of family, and of two hearts that had once been broken, now forever bound as one. A year after the wedding, the seaside mansion was no longer just a house. It was a true home, overflowing with laughter. From dawn till dusk, joyful sounds filled every hallway. The patter of Liam's tiny feet, Grace's gentle humming, and sometimes Ethan's deep laughter mingled with the sound of waves outside. But their happiness didn't stop there. Grace was pregnant, and not with one child, but with twins. When the doctor announced the news, Ethan could hardly believe it. He stared at the ultrasound image, then turned to Grace, his eyes shimmering with tears like a child's. "Two of them," he repeated, his voice breaking with emotion. Grace smiled softly, placing her hand over his. "Two little angels, one boy, one girl." Ethan pulled her into his arms, tears rolling down the face of a man once known for his stoic strength. "My God, thank you for bringing them into our lives." The months that followed were filled with love. Grace continued her work as a consultant for the Rivera program, helping thousands of women across the country learn the art of childcare. She taught not just skills, but compassion and patience, the values she had lived by with her whole heart. In every session, she often said, "What matters isn't how much theory you know, but how much love you have to see what a child can't say." Ethan often sat quietly in the back of her classes, watching her with the same admiration he had felt from the very beginning. To his colleagues, he would say, "That woman turned my pain into hope for thousands. She doesn't just teach how to care for children, she teaches how to be human." When spring came, the hillside around the mansion bloomed with white flowers, and on one bright, sunlit morning, their twins were born. A boy with Ethan's ocean blue eyes and a girl with Grace's soft brown hair entered the world, crying together as everyone in the delivery room cheered and wept with joy. Ethan held his wife's hand tightly, whispering through his tears, "You've saved me again, Grace. You gave me a family, something I thought I'd lost forever." Grace smiled weakly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, Ethan, you gave me the courage to love without fear." The days that followed were a symphony of joy. Liam, now 4 years old, ran around the two cribs, always eager to help Mom take care of the babies. He called them the sunbeams, because, as he said, they make everyone smile all day. Grace would look at her son, her heart overflowing with gratitude, for life, for love, for everything she had never dreamed possible. From a nameless housemaid, she now had a home, a husband, 3 children, and a mission built on love. One afternoon, while she was rocking the babies on the porch, the television broadcasted the trial of the 5 former nannies. The court sentenced them for defamation and manipulation of the media. But what stunned the nation wasn't the verdict. It was Grace's speech afterward. Standing in front of the cameras, her face calm and kind, she said, "I forgive them, because I understand that people sometimes do wrong, not out of cruelty, but out of fear and envy. I choose forgiveness because hatred cannot heal. Only compassion can." That speech aired nationwide, moving millions to tears. The image of Grace holding her 2 babies became a symbol of forgiveness and human strength, rising above prejudice. When she turned off the TV, Ethan walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her. "You never stop making me proud, Grace," he whispered. "Not because you're my wife, but because you're you, the woman who made the world believe in goodness again." Grace turned and leaned her head on his shoulder. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have had the courage to walk this far." Ethan smiled softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We walked through the darkness together. Now let's live in the light we've created." That afternoon, the whole family went out to the garden. The white chrysanthemums Grace had planted years ago were now in full bloom under the golden sun. Liam ran ahead, holding a kite, his laughter echoing across the yard. Ethan pushed the stroller carrying the twins, while Grace walked beside him, their hands clasped tightly together. The sea breeze swept across them, sunlight spilling like liquid gold over the flowers. Laughter mingled with the rhythm of the waves, the whisper of the wind, and the beating hearts of those who had once known pain but chose not to surrender to it. On the porch, a small wooden sign read, "Home of love, faith, and kindness." And so their story came to a close, not with an ending, but with a beginning. A beginning where love transcended class, compassion conquered prejudice, and happiness was built not from luck, but from faith in the goodness within every human heart. Beneath the radiant sunlight of their garden, the small family smiled, an everlasting symbol of love's power, of hearts that chose to forgive, and of the truth that miracles always begin with people who dare to believe in them.